Greetings. The title of this presentation is Engagement, Becoming Penguin, Canary, and Cyborg. My name is Anani Vasquez, and I am a PhD student at Arizona State University. The purpose of this study was to describe the becoming of an engaging inclusion math class. The research question was, how does an inclusion math class become engaging? I would like to begin by explaining what I mean by becoming. According to Deleuze and Guattari, becoming is a process of change within an assemblage. An assemblage being a web of relationships or connections between many members. The assemblage in this study is the math class. In becoming, properties of the members of the assemblage might disappear or be replaced with new properties, while changes in relationships occur. Deleuze and Guattari use the terms molar and molecular when describing becoming. Molar refers to the current system or procedures in place, while molecular is the line that leads to change from the norm. Becoming is generative. It is a new way of being. The concepts of inclusion and engagement will be discussed within the framework of becoming. The assemblage in this study was a 5th grade math class in an inner city charter school in the United States. The human members were diverse. There were students receiving services for special education and English language learning. Most students were from low CIES households and from Latinx and/or Black heritages. The teacher, coach, and myself, the educational researcher, were also members of the assemblage. Some of the non-human members of the assemblage will be revealed during the presentation. In following with Deleuze and Guattari, I have structured my presentation to begin with the molar, or status quo found in the assemblage, then the molecular, those changes or ruptures from the molar, and finally lines of flight. Lines of flight will be the concepts, thoughts, ideas that we can take with us, which might lead to further possibilities. Although becoming does not occur in a linear fashion, the presentation will, for the sake of time and because of the PowerPoint format. In this study, the molar included special education inclusion, teacher coaching for professional development, and student engagement as ongoing practices. Theoretical perspectives and methodology in the research study will also be described as part of the molar. Special education inclusion within the study class assemblage is described as a general education classroom with students on individual education programs receiving special education services. These students spent most of the day in the general education classroom. They received further individualized instruction in small groups with special education teachers in the resource room. The teacher in this assemblage, Julie, worked with her math teacher coach, Rose, for professional development. Rose was also the curriculum director at the school. Rose worked with grade level teams as well as individual teachers to improve instruction. Student engagement at this school was mostly understood under the framework of Teach Like a Champion by Doug Limov. Strategies to promote student engagement included things like SLANT, which stands for sit up, listen, ask and answer questions, nod your head, and track the speaker. Individual and choral student responses were encouraged, as well as the use of joy factor, the incorporation of fun or enjoyment in learning. This study's theoretical perspective is based on Deleuze and Guattari's concept of becoming, including the molar, molecular, and lines of flight as described earlier. This study uses rhizoanalysis or mapping based on Deleuze and Guattari's description of the rhizome as becoming, as well as glow data and anecdotes. Maggie McClure introduced the concept of data that glows. This data stands out and seems to grasp us, to have the capacity to animate further thought. Glow data in this study was found within told stories. Michael wrote about the use of anecdotes as incidents worth counting because of their nature, stories that demand to be told. 6 anecdotes from the collected data were considered glow data. They were taken from a lesson observation, which was videotaped, a dyad interview, and a dialogue interview. The 3 anecdotes taken from the dialogue interview are called A, penguin story, B, water bottle problem, and C, reading questions. Penguin story was told by both Julie and Rose. The other 2 stories were told by Julie. The penguin story was highly entangled in the assemblage. A visiting librarian had told the story during a school assembly. He told of how a penguin colony will rely on one penguin to be the first to jump into the ocean to test its safety. Later, a student mentioned the story during math class as he related it to classroom learning. This student was not in the observed class, but in another section that Julie taught. Julie began to tell this story during the interview, but soon Rose began to participate in the retelling. Rose had been present for the librarian visit, but not in Julie's class when the student had connected the class experience to the story. The water bottle problem and the reading question anecdotes highlighted times in class when Julie had allowed off-topic, tangential, or interdisciplinary connections to have space within math class. The other 3 anecdotes were taken from the lesson observation video and field notes, and are called D, struggling student, E, adults on observation day, and F, first visit. Struggling student is the account of how J, a student labeled as having an emotional disturbance, was socially and emotionally challenged during the lesson observation. Adults on observation day describes how Julie, Rose, and I had to be flexible with time constraints and unexpected events. This anecdote demonstrates how technology became entangled in the assemblage through various devices. First visit is a retelling of my first visit to the class to introduce myself and take student assent. For the Rhizo analysis, I constructed a map using items in my home, which allowed me to use my body to think through the data. This is a picture of the map as it stands today. The larger molar masses flow into molecular lines, moving from school procedures and policies to perspectives and varying practices. The many smaller connections, as well as stops and turns, are molecular lines leading to lines of flight. The very many connections highlighted through the anecdotes led to new ways of envisioning student engagement. So how does an inclusion math class become engaging? Through the mapping, I found 3 ways of becoming engaged: becoming penguin, becoming canary, and becoming cyborg. These divergent perspectives on engagement were not based on the current school student engagement expectations, but emerged through the unfolding of the study. Becoming penguin is a sacrificing, risk-taking, trailblazing kind of engagement. In the anecdote of the penguin story, penguins were entangled in the class assemblage through the story of the first penguin to jump into the ocean. This is an excerpt from the penguin anecdote using Julie's words. Well, I had a kid. He goes, "That's the first penguin." I'm like, wow, we haven't talked about that in a long time. You never know what's going to connect with one of them. So if we keep using these with kids, I think that it encourages them to continue. Julie was telling this story about how students make connections, but was also giving an example from when a student was able to leave the planned lesson and go, in a sense, on a tangent to make meaningful connections. Canary was entangled with the class assemblage through the struggling student anecdote. An excerpt of the anecdote reads, "As he went with Julie towards his seat, his fist shot out towards Jose's back. Jose turned around and looked at him. It was a weak punch at best. Julie told Jay, 'We don't hit,' and walked him to his seat. As I continued to focus on Jay, I noticed his face and gestures became more agitated. He drummed his pencil on the table. He threw his hands up in exasperation. He pounded the table. He put his head down in defeat. Julie came by to see how she could help Jay again and recommended he use the recovery station. He refused and stayed in his seat. Julie called the front office for help. He suddenly stilled, stopping his pounding on the table, and his expression shifted. I can't tell if it's rejection or relief. Becoming engaged as becoming cyborg refers to the human technology assemblages throughout the class assemblage, especially seen in the Adults on Observation Day anecdote. In many cases, engagement was possible because of the human technology assemblages, such as the researcher video camera text overhead screen assemblage, the teacher computer projector screen assemblage, and the teacher coach text video recording assemblage. Considering these forms of becoming engaged as lines of flight, let us look at where these concepts might flow. Through the analysis, I experienced engagement as happening when off topic or on a tangent. When the teacher allowed the class assemblage to move off topic, there was more excitement, more connections made, and more motivation to follow further tangents. Engagement occurs even when physically absent. Engagement when physically absent can occur with the help of technology. Rose, the teacher coach, was not in the room for the lesson observation, but was able to engage through the recorded video, texts, and emails. Engagement can also occur through time and space. Jay, the struggling student, had his placement changed soon after the lesson observation, but his presence was still engaged within the history of that class assemblage. The student who retold the penguin story was not present in the lesson observation or during any of the interviews, but he was also engaged in this math class assemblage through the teacher's memory. There are multiplicities of ways of becoming engaged. Different members of the assemblage became engaged in different ways at different times. Roles were blurred. As student became teacher, teacher became student, such as when the student connected the penguin story to math class. Penguin, canary, and cyborg became entangled as members of the class assemblage through the rhizoanalysis. There is no longer a hierarchy or an expectation of only one right acceptable way to do, think, or be. This is especially important in inclusion classrooms and any classroom with diverse members. This study was not designed to evaluate student engagement using a given framework. Looking at student engagement from an open-ended lens allowed for new insights into how the members of the classroom assemblage were relating and engaging with each other and the content. I found engagement to be a product of desire. School and curriculum expectations and practices through desire, or the hope, need, want, dream for something more, became something new, if only for a little while. Going off task or being absent produced engagement in various instances. In the process of becoming, the actual, what is, and the virtual, what might be, blur. As educators continue to study student engagement through an open-ended lens, the concepts of becoming penguin, canary, and cyborg, as well as others not yet conceptualized, invite thought to take new turns, to experience engagement in new, possibly more inclusive ways. Thank you for your time. Any comments, feedback, or questions can be sent to me through email or Facebook. Have a good day.